22 years of marriage ended the moment I opened that bedroom door. But what destroyed me wasn't finding my wife with another man. It was what she said after. And honestly, I wish that had been the worst part, because 3 days later, I discovered she'd been stealing from me in ways I never imagined. I'm Jack, 44, and I've spent the last 2 decades building a consulting firm from nothing into something real, the kind of business with actual offices and a team that depends on the decisions we make. And yeah, I co-own it with 2 partners, which matters because one of them was currently in my bed. My wife, Claire, had always been the logical one, the person who never raised her voice, who handled our finances because she was better with numbers than I'd ever be, a bookkeeper by trade, someone I trusted completely. And that's the thing about trust, right? You don't know it's gone until you're standing in your own bedroom watching it evaporate. We had one son, Leo, 19, finishing his first year of college, a good kid who called home every Sunday and never asked for more money than he needed. And I kept thinking about him the entire drive home that afternoon, how his world was about to crack in half, and he didn't even know it yet. The day started normal, boring even. I had back-to-back meetings scheduled, but the last client canceled, something about a family emergency. So I figured I'd surprise Claire. Maybe we'd grab an early dinner. I even stopped by the jewelry store on the way home because our anniversary was coming up, and I'd seen her looking at this bracelet a few weeks back. The same white gold that matched my grandfather's ring I kept in the bedroom closet. The one with the small sapphire that she'd always admired. Her car was in the driveway when I pulled up, which made sense since she worked from home most days. But something felt off in a way I couldn't name, like when you walk into a room and know someone was just talking about you. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the holding its breath kind. And I stood in the foyer for a second just listening, telling myself I was being paranoid, that the stress from work was making me imagine things. Then I heard it, voices upstairs, muffled but definitely there. And my brain immediately started making excuses. Maybe she was on a work call. Maybe she had the TV on. Maybe anything except what I knew in my gut was happening. I took the stairs slowly, each step feeling like I was walking toward the edge of something I couldn't come back from. And I remember thinking about Leo again, about how if I just turned around right now and left, I could keep his life intact, keep pretending everything was fine. The bedroom door was barely closed, just cracked open enough that I could hear everything clearly now. And I stood there like an idiot with my hand on the doorknob, frozen, because once I opened it, there was no going back to the life I had 20 minutes ago. I opened it anyway. Claire was there, obviously, and so was Evan, my business partner of 8 years, the guy I'd trusted with half my company, the guy who'd been to our house for dinner probably 50 times, and the look on his face was pure panic, like a kid caught shoplifting. But Claire, she just looked annoyed. Not guilty, not sorry, just irritated, like I'd interrupted something important, and she actually said, "You're early," like I was the one who'd done something wrong, like I should have called ahead before coming to my own house. Evan grabbed his clothes and bolted past me without a word, nearly knocked me over on his way out. But I wasn't watching him. I was watching Claire pull the sheet around herself with this expression that was somehow both defensive and bored. And when I just stood there, unable to form words, she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, come on. It was one time. Don't make it into some huge drama." The bracelet box was still in my jacket pocket. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my ribs, and I thought about taking it out right then, showing her what I'd been planning. But what would be the point? I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to ask how long or why or what the hell was she thinking. But she cut me off with, "Honestly, Jack, you're overreacting. It's not like it means anything. It just happened." I still didn't speak, couldn't. My brain was trying to process what was happening, but nothing made sense. This wasn't how betrayal was supposed to look. Where was the crying, the begging for forgiveness, the remorse? Instead, she sat there looking at me like I was inconveniencing her. And then she said it, the thing I'll probably never forget. She tilted her head slightly and smiled. Not a nice smile, something cruel, and said, "If it makes you feel better, he's better in bed anyway. So maybe you should be thanking me for not wasting both our times." Something in me went completely cold, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off every emotion I had. And I just nodded once, turned around, and walked out. I didn't slam doors, didn't yell, didn't even look back. I just got in my car and drove, no destination in mind, just away from that house and the person I apparently never knew at all. My phone started ringing before I even made it to the highway. Claire's name lighting up the screen over and over, but I couldn't deal with her voice right now, couldn't handle whatever excuse or justification she was preparing. I ended up at Sam's place, my college roommate who lived about 40 minutes away, and when he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't ask questions, just pulled me inside and handed me a drink. We sat in his living room for maybe an hour before I could actually form sentences, and even then all I said was, "Claire was with Evan," and Sam just nodded slowly, processing, then asked, "What are you going to do?" And honestly, I had no idea. That night I stayed on his couch, phone still blowing up with messages from Claire, ranging from angry to apologetic to angry again. But I couldn't bring myself to read them, couldn't engage with whatever narrative she was trying to build. Morning came too fast and too slow at the same time, and I woke up with this crystal clear thought. I couldn't control what she'd done, couldn't change it or fix it, but I could control what happened next, and I was going to make damn sure she understood exactly what she'd thrown away. I started making calls, my bank first, then my lawyer, then my accountant, moving through my mental checklist like I was handling a client crisis. Because if I stopped to actually feel what was happening, I'd fall apart. And I couldn't afford that. Not yet. By noon, I'd changed every password, moved money from our joint accounts into ones she couldn't access, and scheduled an emergency meeting with our third business partner, Thomas, to discuss personnel issues. That's when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. And when I answered, a woman's voice said, "Jack, this is Nina, Claire's friend from book club, and I need to tell you something you're not going to want to hear." Here's what strikes me about this first part. When someone shows you who they really are in a crisis, believe them immediately, because Claire's lack of remorse wasn't shock or denial. It was her true character finally surfacing without the mask. Notice how Jack's instinct was to protect his resources before processing his emotions. That's not coldness. That's survival intelligence kicking in when your brain knows the danger isn't over yet. Nina's voice was shaking when she told me this wasn't a one-time thing, that she'd seen Claire and Evan together at restaurants across town over the past 6 months, acting like a couple, holding hands, the whole thing. And she'd kept quiet because she didn't want to get involved, but when Claire called her this morning crying about how I'd abandoned her, Nina couldn't take the manipulation anymore and decided I deserved the truth. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there in Sam's kitchen staring at my coffee, trying to process that this wasn't some drunken mistake or moment of weakness. This was deliberate, calculated, months of lying to my face while I worked 60-hour weeks to keep our business running and our life comfortable. The financial stuff was easier to handle than the emotional stuff, so that's where I focused. I logged into every account we shared and started documenting everything. And that's when I noticed the charges, hotels in the city on days Claire said she was visiting her sister, dinners at expensive places I'd never been to, a jewelry purchase from last month for $800 that I definitely didn't make. I transferred exactly half of our joint savings into a new account. Not a penny more, because I wasn't trying to screw her over. I was protecting myself. And then I removed her as an authorized user on my credit cards, changed the passwords on our streaming services, our cloud storage, everything. My phone kept buzzing with messages from Claire, the tone shifting every few hours. First, it was anger demanding I come home so we could talk like adults. Then it shifted to minimizing, saying I was being dramatic and that couples work through rough patches. Then she pulled out the guilt card asking if I was really going to throw away 2 decades over one mistake. And finally, around midnight, she sent a long message about how I was committing financial abuse by cutting off her access to money. That one actually made me laugh, a bitter sound that surprised me, because she was the one who'd been spending our money on hotels with my business partner. But somehow, I was the abuser for stopping it. Leo called the next morning, his voice tight with confusion, wanting to know what was going on because his mom was freaking out and wouldn't tell him anything except that I'd left, and I didn't want to do this over the phone. Didn't want to tell him at all, honestly, but he deserved better than Claire's version of events. So I told him his mom and I were having serious problems and I needed him to trust me right now. That I'd explain everything soon, but I needed to handle some things first. He went quiet for a second, then asked if she was okay though, because she sounded really upset, and I had to bite back the response that she should be upset, that she'd earned every bit of the panic she was feeling. Instead, I told him she was fine and that I loved him and we'd talk properly in a few days. Sam offered to go with me when I said I needed to get some things from the house, said I shouldn't be alone for this. And honestly, I was grateful because I didn't trust myself not to do something stupid if Claire started up with her justifications again. We pulled up around 2 in the afternoon, and I could see Claire's car parked at an odd angle near the mailbox, like she'd rushed out and come back in a panic. Driver's door still not fully closed, and the house felt like a museum of a life that didn't exist anymore. Everything exactly where it had been, but completely different somehow. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed clothes and my laptop, some documents from the filing cabinet. And then I remembered my grandfather's ring, the one I'd inherited when he died. White gold with a small sapphire. Nothing flashy, but it meant something to me. I kept it in a wooden box in my closet for safekeeping. The box was still there, but when I opened it, nothing, just empty velvet lining. And I stood there staring at it like if I looked long enough the ring would reappear. Sam came up behind me and asked what was wrong, and I showed him the empty box without saying anything. We tore apart the bedroom looking for it, checked drawers, under the bed, in her jewelry box, everywhere. And that's when I found the receipt, crumpled in the bathroom trash under some tissues like she tried to hide it, but not very well. A pawn shop on the east side of town, dated a week ago. Item description said men's white gold ring with stone, and the amount made me feel sick, for $150. My grandfather's ring that he wore for 60 years, that he gave me on his deathbed. Sold for less than her dinner bills with Evan. Sam put his hand on my shoulder and said something about getting it back, but I wasn't listening. I was doing math in my head. A week ago was when Claire had suddenly mentioned needing new tires for her car, said it was urgent and expensive, and I'd transferred money without question because that's what you do for your wife. Except now I realized she'd pawned my grandfather's ring and still asked me for money. Double dipping while planning God knows what with Evan. I left a note on the kitchen counter, simple and factual. Told her the mortgage payment was covered this month, but she needed to figure out her own finances after that, and that I noticed some family heirlooms were missing and expected them returned, or I'd be involving the police. We were loading my stuff into Sam's car when I heard footsteps behind us, and Claire came running out of the house in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair a mess, eyes red from crying or anger. I couldn't tell which, and she started saying we needed to talk, that I couldn't just leave like this, her voice getting higher with each word, but I didn't yell, didn't engage, just looked at her once, really looked at her. And I didn't see the woman I married. I saw a stranger wearing her face. Someone who'd been playing me for months while I worked to give her a comfortable life. I told her I had nothing to say to her right now, got in Sam's car, and as we pulled away I watched her in the side mirror, standing in the driveway looking lost, and I felt absolutely nothing. Sam had an extra bedroom in his apartment that he'd been using for storage, and we spent the afternoon clearing it out, setting up a temporary space for me. And it felt pathetic in a way, 44 years old and crashing at a friend's place like I was 20 again, but it also felt clean, like I was finally doing something instead of just absorbing punches. That evening my lawyer called back. I'd left him a voicemail that morning laying out the basics, and he was direct about what came next. Virginia allows fault-based divorce, which meant Claire's affair could actually impact asset division and alimony, especially if I could prove it was long-term and she'd been misusing marital funds, and he recommended I document everything. Every message, every call, every financial transaction that seemed off. I spent the next few hours going through bank statements from the past year, highlighting charges that didn't make sense, hotels, restaurants, that jewelry purchase, and a pattern emerged that made me feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. Every other Thursday, there was a hotel charge, like clockwork, which meant this wasn't spontaneous passion. This was scheduled. They had a standing appointment to destroy my life, while I was working late those same Thursdays to close deals and keep the business growing. My phone buzzed around 9 that night with a message from a number I didn't recognize, and when I opened it my stomach dropped. The text said she was Kate, Evan's wife, and that we needed to talk. This section reveals something critical about financial infidelity. It's often the clearest evidence of premeditation because money leaves trails that emotions don't. The grandfather's ring being pawned while she asked for tire money shows a level of calculated cruelty that goes beyond the affair itself. It's about erasing his family history while funding her betrayal. Kate and I met at a coffee shop the next morning, neutral territory, and I spotted her immediately because she looked exactly how I felt, exhausted and angry and trying to hold it together in public. She was 7 months pregnant, which Evan had apparently forgotten to mention to anyone at work, and seeing her there with her hands wrapped around a decaf latte made the whole thing feel even more disgusting. Like we weren't just two people who'd been betrayed, we were collateral damage in someone else's selfish game. She didn't waste time with small talk, just slid her phone across the table showing me text messages between her and Evan from the past week. Him telling her he was working late, that he had client dinners, the same lies Claire had probably been telling me, and Kate said Evan's sister had finally broken down yesterday and told her everything, that she'd known for months but felt trapped between loyalty to her brother and doing what was right. I showed her the bank statements, the hotel charges, the pattern of every other Thursday, and she pulled out her own records, showed me that Evan's credit card had charges that matched, same hotels, same dates, and we just sat there for a minute looking at the evidence of how thoroughly we'd both been played. She asked if I knew how long it had been going on, and I told her about Nina's call. 6 months at least, maybe longer, and Kate's face went pale because 6 months ago she'd told Evan she was pregnant, which meant he'd started this affair right after finding out he was going to be a father. We talked for nearly 2 hours, comparing notes, filling in gaps, and the picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't some passionate affair. It was calculated and cold. They'd been using company resources to fund it, staying at hotels that Evan expensed as client meetings, dinners charged to the corporate card as business development. And Claire had been signing off on these expenses in her role as our bookkeeper, essentially authorizing her own affair with company money. Kate mentioned she'd been going through Evan's laptop after his sister's confession, trying to understand the scope of his lies, and she'd found spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, tracking expenses and making sure nothing looked suspicious, dates and amounts and notes about which charges went where, like they were running an operation instead of destroying 2 families. I felt sick listening to this, realizing that Claire hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd been actively participating in fraud, using our business as a piggy bank for her relationship with my partner, and every signature she'd put on those expense reports was another deliberate choice to continue the lie. Kate said she'd already contacted a divorce attorney and was going to file by the end of the week, but she wanted to know if I was planning to take this to the board, because if Evan had been misusing company funds, then this wasn't just a personal issue anymore. It was a legal one that could destroy his career. I told her I'd been thinking about exactly that I had a meeting scheduled with our third partner Thomas the next morning, and that I was bringing every piece of evidence I had, bank statements, expense reports, hotel receipts, all of it, because Evan didn't just betray me as a friend, he betrayed the company and everyone who worked there, and I wasn't going to let that slide. We exchanged numbers, and Kate made me promise to keep her updated, said she wanted to know when the hammer fell, because she deserved to see him face consequences for once instead of just talking his way out of trouble like he always did. The meeting with Thomas was brutal in its efficiency. I laid out everything on the conference room table and watched his face go from confused to angry to absolutely livid in about 90 seconds. And he immediately started pulling up files on his laptop, cross-referencing the expense reports I'd brought with our actual client meetings and travel schedules. Within an hour, we'd identified over $30,000 in fraudulent charges spanning 8 months, hotels that had no corresponding client visits, dinners on nights when no one was traveling for business, cash advances that went nowhere except presumably into their pockets. And Thomas was so angry, he actually had to step out of the room for a minute to compose himself before calling our lawyer. By noon, we had a plan. Evan was going to be terminated immediately, his access to all systems revoked, his partnership stake bought out at the minimum allowed by our operating agreement. And we were documenting everything for potential criminal charges because this wasn't just an affair, this was theft. Claire's situation was simpler. She was an employee, not a partner. So Thomas drafted a termination letter citing misuse of company resources and breach of fiduciary duty, effective immediately, no severance, no references, and honestly, I felt nothing when I signed off on it. Just a cold sense that justice was finally moving in the right direction. I called Leo that afternoon and asked him to meet me for dinner, told him it was important and that I needed to explain some things face to face. And when he showed up looking worried, I didn't waste time with preamble, just laid out the facts. His mom had been having an affair with my business partner for at least 6 months. They'd been stealing from the company to fund it. And I caught them in our bedroom. Leo just sat there, his burger untouched, processing, and then he asked if I was sure, if maybe there was some misunderstanding, and I showed him some of the expense reports on my phone, the hotel receipts, the pattern that was too consistent to be anything but intentional, and I watched something break in his eyes, that moment when your parent stops being infallible and becomes just another flawed human who made terrible choices. He got quiet after that, the kind of quiet that comes from having your understanding of someone completely rewritten, and finally he said he believed me and that he was sorry, which made me feel worse somehow, because he shouldn't have to apologize for his mother's choices. But I told him I loved him and that none of this changed how I felt about him, and I think he needed to hear that more than anything else I could have said. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Claire's lawyer took one look at the evidence and apparently advised her to settle, because fighting it would mean all of this coming out in court, the affair, the fraud, the misuse of marital assets, everything, and she didn't want that kind of public humiliation. She signed the papers 3 weeks later without contest. I kept the house and my retirement accounts. She got her car and a small portion of savings. No alimony because Virginia's adultery laws worked in my favor, and honestly, I didn't care about any of it. I just wanted it done so I could start rebuilding. My lawyer managed to get my grandfather's ring back from the pawn shop. Had to pay $600 to reclaim it, which was more than Claire got for it. But holding that ring again felt like reclaiming a piece of my family that she'd tried to steal, and I put it back in its box knowing it would stay safe this time. Evan ended up facing criminal charges for the corporate theft. Kate made sure the district attorney got every piece of evidence we'd compiled. And last I heard, he was looking at probation and full restitution of the $30,000 plus legal fees. His career in consulting basically over because nobody wants to hire someone who steals from their own company. And his marriage was done too because Kate filed the day after our coffee meeting. I moved into a new apartment downtown about a month after everything settled, something modern with floor-to-ceiling windows and zero memories attached to it. Completely different from the house I'd shared with Claire, and Leo started coming by most weekends to watch games or just hang out, which surprised me because I thought he might pull away after everything. But if anything, we got closer. Like the lies being gone made room for something more honest between us. Sam kept trying to get me back into the social scene, dragged me to dinners with his other friends, and tried setting me up on dates. And I appreciated the effort even if I wasn't ready for most of it. But it was nice to feel like life was moving forward instead of just treading water in the wreckage. About 4 months after everything fell apart, Thomas and I hired a new partner to replace Evan, a woman named Rachel who came with impeccable references and zero connection to our personal drama. And we also brought on a new bookkeeper, someone from outside our network who underwent a background check that would have made the FBI proud. The business recovered faster than I expected. Turned out that losing a partner who was actively stealing from us actually improved our profit margins, and our team seemed relieved to have the tension gone even if they didn't know all the details. I started taking photography classes on weekends, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. And there was something therapeutic about learning to see the world through a lens, focusing on composition and light instead of betrayal and fraud. Leo brought his girlfriend to meet me around month 5, a smart pre-med student who made him laugh, and watching them together reminded me that not all relationships were built on lies, that some people actually chose honesty and kindness, and maybe someday I'd find that again, but for now I was okay just being his dad and figuring out who I was outside of being someone's husband. 6 months after opening that bedroom door, I was doing okay, not great, but genuinely okay. The kind of okay that comes from surviving something you didn't think you could survive and realizing you're stronger than you gave yourself credit for. The business was stable, my relationship with Leo was better than it had been in years, and I'd stopped checking my phone every morning expecting some new disaster from Claire, who'd apparently moved 2 states away to start over somewhere nobody knew her story. I still thought about that moment sometimes, standing in my bedroom doorway watching my entire life rearrange itself in an instant. But mostly I thought about what came after, the choices I made when everything fell apart, the people like Sam and Kate and Thomas who showed up when it mattered. And yeah, the betrayal didn't destroy me. It just burned away everything that wasn't real and left me with something harder and more honest. And I guess that's not the worst way to start over. What this story ultimately teaches us is that how you respond to betrayal matters more than the betrayal itself. Because Jack could have spiraled into bitterness or revenge, but instead he chose documentation, legal action, and protecting what mattered most. The real victory wasn't the divorce settlement or Evan's criminal charges. It was Jack rebuilding his relationship with his son and discovering that losing someone who never really valued you isn't actually a loss at all. So here's what I want to ask you. If you were in Jack's position, would you have handled the financial side first like he did, or would emotions have taken over? And second, do you think Claire and Evan's lack of remorse made it easier or harder for Jack to move on? Let me know in the comments what you think.